Shalom, I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you Orthodox Jewish preparations in the land of Israel for the rebuilding of the temple and the coming of King Messiah. In March, Rabbi Chaim Richman, the international director of the Temple Institute, announced that the Temple Institute has initiated the second stage toward building the temple, and that is compiling a list of Jewish priests who will be eligible to prepare the Red Heifer and serve in the temple. The Temple Institute is a non-profit organization founded in 1987, which is dedicated to rebuilding the Jewish temple on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. The Temple Institute trains the descendants of the biblical Aaron in their priestly duties and prepares educational materials and programs about the temple for use in schools in Israel and around the world. Over the years, it has also made remarkable practical achievements toward turning the third temple into a reality. It has recreated over 70 utensils fit for the temple service, including the gold menorah, the gem-encrusted breastplate of the high priest, musical instruments used by the Levites, and priestly garments. The Levitical registry will include men who have a clear patriarchal heritage from the priestly class, that is, descendants of Aaron, were born and raised in Israel and have observed the laws of purity incumbent upon priests. This includes not coming into proximity with the dead. So priests, or in Hebrew, Kohanim, who were born in hospitals, have visited hospitals, or have entered cemeteries are not eligible. Once the Temple Institute has compiled a list of candidates with verified eligibility, it will begin to train them in the complex preparation of the ashes of the red heifer. The training will take place at the Nazir HaKodesh, an institute established 3 years ago to educate priests in the details of the temple service. The project of compiling a list of Jewish priests who will be eligible to prepare the red heifer and serve in the temple has implications not just for the Kohanim, but for anyone interested in taking part in the temple service. Anyone going up to the temple needs to be on a high level of ritual purity. Most types of impurity can be removed through immersion in a mikveh, which is a ritual bath. For ritual impurity imparted through contact or proximity to a dead person, the purification process requires a priest to sprinkle water mixed with the ashes of a red heifer. Today, after thousands of years without a temple, all people are considered to be on this level of impurity, making the reinstituting of the red heifer ashes an essential part of the return of the temple service. The announcement of compiling a list of Jewish priests who will be eligible to prepare the red heifer and serve in the temple coincides with the weekly Torah reading that describes the preparation of the red heifer. After decades of research on how to practically restore the temple, Temple Institute scholars realized that the first step in the seemingly impossible task was raising a red heifer. Frozen embryos of red Angus cattle have been implanted in Israeli cattle, introducing the breed to Israel. Biblical law requires that the red heifer be unblemished, and it is forbidden from being milked or impregnated, so it must be raised in special supervised conditions. Unlike most other aspects of the temple service, burning of the red heifer and the use of its ashes to purify do not require ascending to the Temple Mount. This precludes any political complications that may arise, since Jews today are currently prevented from praying or performing any religious rituals on the Temple Mount. Rabbi Richman said, "This is a huge jump for the Temple Institute and a huge leap for the Jewish people. For the first time in 2,000 years, after miraculously returning to the land of Israel, we are beginning the process of reinstating the biblical purity of the Jewish priesthood. This is another bold move for our institute, having already painstakingly prepared more than 70 sacred vessels for the third temple. We proudly call upon all those who may fit the bill to contact the Temple Institute immediately." Last year, in preparation for the Passover holiday, the Temple Institute in Jerusalem reenacted the bringing of the Passover lambs to the temple for the Passover sacrifice. Although the sacrifice requires that the altar be standing in its place on the Temple Mount, the practice exercise was conducted for educational purposes on International Temple Mount Awareness Day. According to the book of Exodus, the Israelites were commanded to take an unblemished lamb or goat into their homes on the 10th day of the first Hebrew month, keeping it until the evening of the 14th day, when it would be ritually slaughtered. The lamb's blood was to be painted on the doorposts of every Israelite home as a sign that God would pass over them during the plague of the death of the firstborn. The lamb would then be roasted and eaten that night, accompanied by bitter herbs and unleavened bread called matzah. The Israelites were also commanded to perform the sacrifice every year thereafter, as a memorial of the exodus from Egypt. Since the establishment of the first temple on the Temple Mount, it was forbidden to offer sacrifices at any other location. Thus, the Passover sacrifice has not been performed since the second temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. Strictly speaking, however, Jewish law does not require that the temple be standing, only that the altar be in its correct position. This ceremony was carried out for two main purposes. Number one, to document the event for an educational DVD, and number two, to rehearse in case an altar is permitted to be placed someday on the Temple Mount. During the exercise, the participating priests all wore authentic garments prepared by the Temple Institute, in practice reciting the appropriate blessings. Silver trumpet blasts and Levitical singing accompanied the sacrifice as required. Regarding the event, the Temple Institute said, "This was the most accurate and authentic reenactment of the service to have taken place in nearly 2,000 years. It included all the stages of the ritual, such as checking the animal for blemishes, slaughtering it, collecting its blood and bringing it to the corner of the altar, skinning the animal and separating its inner parts, and roasting it whole in a special Passover oven." Events like this help prepare for the actual temple. Not only does it raise public awareness, it also helps to instruct the Levitical priests on how to do their service. In late 2014, the Temple Institute in Jerusalem announced that it had finished building an altar suitable for the temple service. The altar, which took several years to build, can be operational in just a moment's notice. The altar is a central component to the biblical sacrificial service. In fact, there were separate altars for the incense and for other sacrifices. The larger altar sat in the outer courtyard of the tabernacle and later the temple. According to the Bible, the altar may not be made out of stones hewn by metal instruments. According to information released by the Temple Institute, since the Torah forbids the use of hewn stones in an altar, and this comes from Deuteronomy chapter 27 verses 5 and 6, it consists of an outer frame of earthen bricks, oven baked to withstand the extreme heat of the altar when in use. This outer frame is filled with natural stones, untouched by metal implements, as per the Torah instruction. The outer brick frame is covered with a thin white plaster, as was done with the altar that stood in the Holy Temple courtyard. It is constructed from bricks fired at roughly 1,000 degrees Celsius to withstand the immense heat of the temple's eternal flame and the weight of the sacrificial animals. The base of the altar contains two portals for collecting the blood poured during animal sacrifices in accordance with the Torah. It is also crowned with four raised corners called horns by the Torah. One thing that makes this altar unique is that it was designed to be disassembled and quickly reassembled in its correct position on the Temple Mount. According to the Temple Institute, the people of Israel are required to build an altar exclusively on the site of the original altar on Mount Moriah, or the Temple Mount. When circumstances become favorable, this new altar can be quickly reassembled on the proper location, enabling the divine service to be resumed without delay. Next, we're going to share with you words from Rabbi Chaim Richman of the Temple Institute, where he explains the importance of performing the Passover sacrifice that was historically associated with the temple and why it is possible to do today by only having an altar without a fully functional rebuilt temple. And now Rabbi Richman's explanation.
The whole idea of what Passover is all about is the Passover offering. The Passover offering is the unsung star of the Passover Seder. And I say unsung because unfortunately the majority of Jewry is either unconscious of it or certainly is not articulating and not, responding to the fact that the real concept of what the Seder that we have on Passover night is about bringing the Passover offering. And for some years now, the Temple Institute, together with other temple factions, organizations, has organized a practice drill of the Passover offering on the eve of Passover, close to, actually, the 10th of Nisan, close to Passover, so that the Jewish people will be focused and recalibrated and familiar with the laws of bringing the Passover offering, because it is incumbent upon all of us, because it is not dependent upon the Messiah to come and tell us now we have to bring the Passover offering. In fact, it's even something that we are allowed to do in a state of impurity if the whole nation is impure. Indeed, in any conversation about the renewal of the offerings in the Holy Temple, about the movement in many different areas of advancing temple consciousness and preparing for the temple and restoring the divine service, the benchmark, as it were, of any such conversation is the Passover offering. You know why? Because of all the things that go on in the temple that can be done, the Passover offering is the one that's, in a way, the most significant for a number of reasons. One is because it is a chukat olam. It is a very serious, binding, eternal covenant upon all of Israel, for which there is a severe punishment on a spiritual level for non-compliance. And there's really no reason why the Jewish people cannot bring the Passover offering now. It's got nothing to do with any signs and wonders or divine intervention or any sort of...
You don't need a holy temple first, Rabbi?
No, you don't need the holy temple to be built. We can build a very small, minimalistic altar that would be... It could still be quite small and yet be valid in terms of Jewish law on the Temple Mount. We can bring it in our current state of impurity. Every detail that we need, according to the intricacies of Torah law, that we need to be present, that would impede the fulfillment of the commandment, we have today.
And
we have
rabbis...
priestly garments. We have the crown of the high priest. It can all be done.
Rabbis of note have said this for generations.
For generations. I mean, the most important rabbis of the modern era and the pre-modern era, universally known luminaries of Jewish law, such as the Chatam Sofer and Rabbi Akiva Eger, great decisors of Jewish law, have unanimously agreed that we must be bringing the Passover offering. And so too in this generation. There's a tremendous amount of renewal, arousal, and support from all different quarters of the rabbinical establishment today. But again, this is all falling short because the issue is a political issue. And if we can admit that, we've already come very far. And this is what I'd like all people to realize, and what more and more rabbis of renown and of high standing are admitting and writing. There are no religious impediments or obstacles to bringing the Passover offering. It is simply a question, and it's not simply, it's a big question of ratzon, meaning of the desire, of the will, of the fortitude, the maxi, the wherewithal, the resolve of the Jewish people. If we had those things, then we could and should and must bring the Passover offering. But of course, this is a complex political animal because it can only be brought in one spot, and that is on the place of the altar on the Temple Mount. So this is already an issue involving the position of the government of Israel.
In addition to the preparations and ceremonial reenactments just discussed, also in March, a special ceremony was held in Jerusalem to reenact the temple service associated with the sighting of the new moon, in preparation for restoring this biblical commandment as well. The event coincided with the beginning of the Jewish month of Adar. In temple times, the new month was considered a minor holiday. In this particular ceremony, gloriously illustrated that. Well, that's going to conclude this week's report, where we shared with you Orthodox Jewish preparations in the land of Israel for the rebuilding of the temple and the coming of the Messiah. We're in the organization that's devoted and dedicated to seeing the rebuilding of the temple, that is the Temple Institute, is in the process of researching and restoring those things that haven't been done for nearly 2,000 years in preparation for the rebuilding of the third temple. This process involves raising a red heifer, training priests regarding the service associated with the ashes of the red heifer, training priests to do the daily offerings, and finding and preparing qualified Jewish Levitical priests descended from Aaron. Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.